Hey guys, Scott here, and today I want to talk about something that is kind of unspoken, but it seems to definitely be true. And it is, why do we not complain about going against like good nurses when we complain about, going against spirits and Freddy's and things like that? Because a good nurse, if you've ever gone against one, has the same basic complete lack of counterplay compared to, like a good spirit. However, you don't really hear people ever complaining about Nurse. I mean, they do sometimes, but, it's not nearly as much as, a killer like Spirit. And I want to go over why that is. And I think a lot of it comes down to there being an unspoken level of respect for player respect. And what I mean by that is basically players will actually admit and justify things when somebody has demonstrated that they have mastered the thing that they're using. So what I mean by that is basically, if you get downed by a hillbilly who engravings whips around a loop perfectly and just clips you at the end, you don't really usually go, that's bullshit, unless, he hits you through the wall or something like that. Usually your response to that is, well, shit, that was good. Like, it's not like, you don't feel like you got robbed by anything. And, in the back of your mind, you're going, well, that guy's actually really fucking good at hillbilly. He kind of deserved that. And I think the same thing kind of applies to Nurse as well. Because the thing is, like I said, a good Nurse has the same lack of counterplay that Spirit does, but we don't complain about Nurse that much. And it's because I think there is a level of mutual respect that goes out if you get clapped by a very good Nurse. And that's because Nurse actually takes some time to master. Now, I'm not saying it takes a super long time, but compared to all the killers in DBD, Nurse is one of the hardest killers to actually master. And because of that, we see less of them, which also may be why we see less complaints about nurses, because there are simply less of them because it requires more skill. But that also kind of goes hand in hand with my point that if you get clapped by a good nurse, you actually don't feel bad about it a lot of the time, because at the very least, you can say to yourself, well, at least that nurse was really good. It's like if you go in a basketball court in a 1v1 versus Michael Jordan or something like that, and he destroys you, you're going to go, well, at least he was pretty damn good. So I don't feel as bad about losing. With Spirit, though, you never really feel that, do you? Because Spirit doesn't take that much to get good with. Like, with the skill, like, from floor to ceiling, like the graph for a lot of killers is like, a line. It goes like, horizontally or diagonally up. And, like with Nurse, you can, the Nurse has a very high skill floor to get into. And then, from then on, you can get more and more precise with your blinks as you learn more and more, and you keep getting more for practicing more and more. Same thing goes like with Hillbilly. You have the basics of the chainsaw, and then you go into, maybe I can use it in certain loops, and then you start getting into curving and mastering those things. These are all things that you can actually apply your skill to over time and begin learning and, getting better at. With Spirit, the bar is basically, can you hear well? And it just stays, can you hear well, the entire time. There's not really that much mastering of Spirit. I've played a shit ton of Spirit. She's actually one of my favorite killers to play. And I can say pretty much that, I don't feel a difference between 100 hours of Spirit versus 500 hours of Spirit. There's not really that much of a difference. You basically you've learned all you're going to learn. And that's not to diminish the amount of skill in listening. It sounds like I'm saying that as like an insult. Oh, you can hear real good. But actually, there is a skill to being able to exactly determine positions based on sound. And that is definitely a skill you learn over time. But that is the main skill that Spirit has, and you learn it quickly, and then that's it. You don't gain anymore. So it's almost hard to say that someone is really good at Spirit, because anyone that plays Spirit for a decent amount of time is good with Spirit. Whereas not everyone is a master nurse, not everyone's a master Billy. Those actually take a shit ton of effort to get into and master, at least in my opinion. So when you actually go down to the nurse and the Billy in these scenarios, you feel like, okay, at least I went down to someone that actually really knows how to play. But when you go against Spirit and you get down by the same, we'll say, lack of counterplay, even though it doesn't apply to like Billy, you feel more like this person didn't really deserve it because they're not necessarily good. That's the internal thought that goes on in people's heads, I think. They didn't really do much to earn being, good or anything like that. So I'm going to now just say that it sucks to go against. And I think that's a lot of the reason why that's like that. And it also goes for any other killer that follows the same concept, where you get a lot of reward for very little effort, into them. So like Freddy is another great example. Freddy's a very good killer. You can win most of your games with Freddy. and you don't have to really do much to learn how to play them. And because of that, people will complain about Freddy. Now, like all these killers, like, I'm talking about Spirit and a very good nurse and Freddy, like, there's not that much counterplay to them. Freddy, you basically just throw pallets down early because she's going to slow you, kind of like Clown does around a loop. So, but we're talking about why people complain about them. And Nurse has less counterplay than probably all of these combined if it's a Master Nurse. But people will complain about Freddy a lot more because they don't feel like the person that is playing the Freddy deserves it, basically. Because Freddy doesn't really take much to master, and basically anyone can do it. Again, if you're Freddy main, I don't mean to insult you or anything like that. I'm just saying Freddy's skill floor is pretty low, and his skill ceiling is also pretty low. And I think basically the lower the skill ceiling of the killer, this is, I guess, the end point. The lower the skill ceiling of the killer, the more outraged people will be at the lack of counterplay that they have, basically. I'm not saying they have no counterplay, because most of these killers do have some form of counterplay, but it's a scale. The harder the killer is to play, the less people will really complain about them. Now, I thought about my point here a lot, and the one exception I found was Deathslinger, because it would be a lie to say Deathslinger does not require skill, because he does require skill. However, this is just my theory here. I'm not even sure I believe this. I'm just thinking of a theory that could make sense with this, because people complain about Deathslinger a lot too. And I think what's going on in this scenario, again, this is just a random theory, is that you have to have skill to master Deathslinger. However, it's not inherently a Dead by Daylight skill. So when you lose, a chase to a Deathslinger or something like that, you don't necessarily feel like you've been outplayed in the game that you are currently playing, because the skill that makes Deathslinger nearly uncounterable and annoying is the ability to aim and shoot, which transfers to basically any shooting game. So it's not necessarily a Dead by Daylight skill. You don't actually have to know how to play that much Dead by Daylight with Deathslinger. You don't really need to know the intricacies of looping that much. I mean, it definitely helps, obviously, but for the most part, I think you just need a standard aiming skill set, which some people find really easy to have. And that possibly is why people, despite Deathslinger requiring skill, complain about Deathslinger a lot too, due to the whole lack of counterplay thing. That's just my guess. I don't even think I fully believe my own theory there. Deathslinger was the one outlier that just didn't make any sense in this whole argument I'm trying to make. So I thought I'd bring it up and be devil's advocate for myself here. Deathslinger just texted me. Shit, he's not happy. All right. But I think that is the main gist of what I wanted to say before I start repeating myself over and over again, as I tend to do. That, yeah, people will tend to complain more about the killer the less skill they take to play. And I think that goes for basically most killers in the game. So overall, I think that's why people don't necessarily complain about Nurse as much, because it takes actually quite a bit to master. And a killer like Spirit takes very little to master, and you get basically the same results. So that is it, guys. Just a random discussion, because why not? And that is it. See you next time.